There are new laws coming into effect all over the state of California in 2020. And these laws are going to have a big impact because they'll let a lot of people build a second home on their property. These homes are called ADUs, and if you or a family member owns property in the state of California, these could be life-changing. That's not an exaggeration. People use ADUs in a lot of different ways because they're very flexible, but the two most common things I see are, one, to generate a little bit of rental income, never hurts to make some extra cash, or two, to give more housing security, make it easier for you to age in that house, even if the cost of living is going up, you know that you can afford to stay there. I'm going to tell you what's in the current laws in California so that you can figure out if you can get a permit to build an ADU, a second home. And then I'm going to teach you how to think about the laws and how to answer questions that you'll get as they come up. And at the end of the video, I'll tell you the next step to building your ADU if you're interested. Let's start with the good news. As of January 2020, it is much easier to build an ADU in California. The state passed a lot of laws that made it simpler. So if you looked into building an ADU a year or two ago, you should look again. Even if the city, county, or an HOA made it very hard and expensive or impractical a year or two ago, there's a new law of the land in California starting in January 2020. And the law empowers California homeowners to build ADUs more easily as part of the solution to California's housing shortage. A lot of the old ordinances are no longer enforceable, and that's why you gotta know about this new law. I won't sugarcoat it though. Even though it's easier, it's still complicated. And the laws are still new, so a lot of the local agencies are figuring out how to interpret and enforce them. New laws are passing at a local level all the time. So buckle up, it's a long journey, but it's worth the prize. And hey, that's why you have videos like this one to explain what's going on. And you can always subscribe to the channel and keep up with changes to the law. And it's kind of an advantage for homeowners. Until cities are passing new ordinances, you have a window of opportunity where you can take advantage of the state laws while the old city ordinances are unenforceable, depending on where you live. The actual laws are pretty complicated and confusing. They passed 4 bills, and each bill affects part of the government code, the civil code, or the health and safety code. And those codes all reference each other and other bits and bobs, so it's really confusing. I'd rather walk you through in conversational simple English, but you can always take a screenshot of this slide and look up the laws on your own if you like that. These laws that we're talking about today defined a type of structure called an accessory dwelling unit, ADU. And you can build an ADU on pretty much any kind of residential property with a primary dwelling on it. What's the definition of an ADU? The most basic definition is it's a secondary home built on the same property as the primary residence. And ADUs have been around in California for years now, but local agencies were sometimes making it very difficult to get a permit. And these new laws try to make it easier. This is a huge breakthrough in California housing law because the state has passed a bunch of new laws to try to make it cheaper, try to make it faster, and try to limit all the restrictions that local agencies can put on you, all while giving homeowners a lot of new superpowers. The new rules make it faster and cheaper. They've made it a lot faster. It's a 60-day turnaround before the city or local agency has to give you a permit or reject you. And it's non-discretionary, which means they don't have the ability to say no for a bunch of wishy-washy reasons or put it up for public review. And notably, you're exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act. They've made it much less expensive, too. They've removed impact fees for ADUs under 750 square feet, and they've reduced them to be proportional to the size of the primary residence for ADUs above that size. Also, they've reduced a lot of the utility charges and burdensome restrictions like parking replacement that could have really driven your bill up. This can remove thousands of dollars from the costs of these projects. Impact fees can be really big because they're the fees cities and counties use to offset the impact of really big development projects. But some cities and counties were using these for very small projects like ADUs. Somebody building a 1-bedroom ADU might get charged like a $7,000 impact fee. Well, that's not the case anymore. And it's pretty easy to understand how the laws interact. If the city takes more than 60 days to respond to your permit, that's not good. And you can go to the HCD and ask for some enforcement of the state rules. If the state tries to charge you an impact fee, even though you're under 750 square feet, it's very black and white. That's not supposed to happen. And you can go to the HCD again. Sometimes a friendly conversation with the planning department goes a lot faster than going to the enforcement body, and it can be a little friendlier. Or if they're a little less friendly, then you might want to go to the HCD. You might want to write them a letter so that you have formal proof. Or you can always get an attorney if that puts a little bit more gravitas. I'll include a link to LegalZoom, it's an affiliate link, in case you need an attorney to write that letter for you. The new laws are also more generous about size and setback requirements. So it used to be that the city might say, oh, you need a 20-foot property setback from the back and side yard. And if you did that, people were like, I don't have any lot left to build the house on. Now it's a 4-foot setback from the property line. You can build up to 16 feet in height, and most types of ADUs can be built up to 1,200 square feet. Attached ADUs can't be greater than 50% of the primary dwelling, but detached ADUs can be up to 1,200 square feet. But this is where it gets complicated. People hear that detached ADUs can be up to 1,200 square feet, and they think that's the end of the story. But the state law also says that the city or county or local agency can put restrictions on that. And then they say that the restrictions can only go so far. We use a metaphor for this called the state floor and the local ceiling. The state sets a floor, a minimum that you can build at. And then, in case the local agency doesn't do any laws, the state also sets a ceiling on that. The local agencies can adopt local ordinances that can restrict you more, or they can sometimes restrict you less. But at no point can the local agency make a restriction that goes below the floor that the state has set. If it does that, then the restriction is unenforceable. So a good early step for your ADU project is just to check, are there local ordinances at the city or county level that affect you? If you can find some, you have to figure out if they're enforceable. If they're from past January 2020, then they're probably up to date, and those are the rules you gotta play by. If there are none, or the ones that exist are unenforceable or older than that, then you're playing by the state rules. Now, even if you're playing by the state rules and there's no local ordinances, the people who interpret, implement, and enforce the state rules are the local agencies, so they're still involved. And there's a lot of room for interpretation in the law, and they kind of have the final word. But this next law is a great example of that and how you can navigate it. So the state laws also defined this cool superpower. It's called a junior accessory dwelling unit. And that's a subset of ADUs that just has to follow a couple rules and then gets to do some special things because it's a junior ADU. The two rules are that it has to be no greater than 500 square feet and it has to be completely contained in the walls of the primary dwelling unit. Seems straightforward, but what does it mean to be entirely within the walls of your primary residence? Some cities interpret that to mean it has to be existing living space, like a bedroom can get converted into a junior ADU. But other cities interpret it to mean it's just space that's literally within the walls. That could be a garage. And that's a big difference. The second interpretation allows for you to turn non-livable space, like a garage, into livable square footage, permitted living space. Again, a good early step is to find out if there is any guidance from the local agency, like city or county. Cities like LA are very, very well spelled out, and they're very pro-homeowner. Other cities are not as well spelled out, and you're going to have to try and see. And sometimes you'll read guidance that's pretty restrictive, and you'll know what you're up against before you try to budget your project. I have to mention triplexes, so triplexes, there, I said it. Technically, The law does allow homeowners with single-family residential to build multiple ADUs, like a junior ADU and an attached ADU. But I would like to focus on things that people are using more commonly in the law, and almost none of my subscribers are trying to do triplexes. So, lots of publicity, but let's move on. And lastly, the law removes a lot of barriers. No more owner occupancy requirements. A lot of cities said you had to live in the primary in order to build an ADU. Not true anymore for 5 years. What happens after 5 years is unclear in the law, but there's no enforcement mechanism, so I have a feeling it's going to work out well for homeowners who act now. They've prohibited lot size requirements, which is a pretty big deal. They've removed a lot of the utility charges and connection fees, or reduced them and limited how heavy they can be. Parking replacement requirements, as long as you're a certain distance from public transport. There's also limits on what homeowner associations can do. And there's a kind of amnesty program for ADUs that were built out of code or non-permitted, and you want to bring back into the code and get them inspected and legal. And there's enforcement mechanisms for all of this, because you can go to the HCD. Okay, it's complicated, but it's worth it. Remember, the prize here is you get a second house. So if you've decided you want a second home on your property, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and come back and learn a little at a time. And if you're actually full of enthusiasm and you're ready for the next thing, this video is a great next step on your ADU journey.